right. I think I got it. All right. So welcome, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces. Again, my name's Damaris. My personal pronouns are she, they, them, and I am the president of Chi Sigma Iota Nu Sigma Chi chapter at North Carolina State University. And it is an honor to be having Dr. Tanya Tinsley here speaking on Allyship in Action, which is the theme of this webinar series, bridging the gap between faith and mental health in the Black church. So I'm looking forward to hearing Dr. Tinsley today. I don't want to take up too much space because I know how precious this time is, but really just want to hone in about how more of her background of being the owner of Transitions Counseling Service and Life Skills Program that includes ministry division, Love and Basketball Ministries, where she provides individual, marriage, family, and group counseling services, consultative services, and leadership development training. She has also served as a clinical director of the Mount Ararat Baptist Church Counseling Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She is both a national certified counselor and a licensed professional counselor. So I'm grateful for your presence today, Dr. Tinsley. It's great to meet you and finally meet you, whether it's virtual. I'm just grateful. I'll go ahead and transfer this space to you and let you take the lead. And if you need anything, please let me know.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for just working with me these last couple months to get this set up. Thank you, Felix. It's great to see some familiar faces. Thank you, Christina. And I'm excited because one of my students from Lincoln University of Pennsylvania is here tonight as well. We had a class in ethics on Saturday, and we were really talking about integrating spiritual and Christian perspectives from an ethical perspective in the counseling process. So I'm really happy that she's here tonight too. So thank you. And it is no problem that your camera is off. I may ask for like emojis just to check in with you all, but what I'll do is I'm going to present for maybe about 40-45 minutes, and then we can open it up for question and answers. My teaching and presenting modalities, I like to attend to those who are visual so they can see the PowerPoint slides, those that are auditory, I have videos, and then also we'll have some links so that you can print some handouts, and we'll talk about that as well. And I will make sure to send a copy of the PowerPoint slides to you so that you can pass those out to people that may want them. So I will share my screen. All right, so the title of our discussion tonight is Allyship in Action, Bridging the Gap Between Faith and Mental Health in the Black Church. If I have my chat box up, so if you have questions between Damaris and I, we will see those, and I will be able to answer those questions as I go or also at the end. So my goals tonight is to talk about what allyship in action looks like, talk about the multicultural and social justice competencies, the rationale for spiritual, ethical, and religious values in counseling, really talk about what is spirituality and religion, and then we also have the competencies for addressing spiritual and religious issues in counseling. So when it really comes to working with those who are religious and spiritual, we do have some competencies as counselors, as helping professionals to weave in and to incorporate, and I will talk about those. And it's really important, especially when we're talking about allyship and religion. So let me share a brief story. While conducting research on religious partnerships in the US, advocate Bree Lascota came across a Jewish organization with a dilemma. Its members wanted to promote Jewish-Muslim dialogue, but didn't understand why no Muslims were showing up at their events. After asking a few questions, Lascota learned that the organization hadn't asked any Muslims to help plan their interfaith activities. So it was the Jewish individuals were trying to plan something for the Muslims, but didn't include them in the process. Lascota, the executive director of the Center for Religion and Civic Culture, tells the story of this common mistake and pluralism in peril. So what does it mean to be an ally, to be in relationship? As Lacosta asked, what does it mean to be an ally that's embedded in a web of relationships, that closes the gaps of differences, that blur the lines between you and I, and between your community and my community, without diminishing the significances of our differences? So let's take a look at what it means to be an ally for individuals, families, and groups within the Black church. But first, let's define some key terms and concepts. So when we talk about multicultural counseling, culture is a membership in a socially constructed way of living. It includes values and beliefs and norms and boundaries and lifestyles that are co-created with others who share similar worldviews. It's really important when we talk about multicultural counseling to also talk about intersectionality, a theoretical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Intersectionality identifies advantages and disadvantages that are felt by people due to a combination of factors. And this term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw over 30 years ago. So when we talk about intersectionality, it refers to the different barriers individuals face dependent on their multiple identities. So somebody could be a racial being and identify as gay, lesbian, transgender, questioning. We could have somebody who is a religious that is gender with a different gender intersection. So with this picture, I'd like to show the intersectionalities, and we have to really understand the identity of a person. And when it comes to these aspects of culture, they may not be the presenting issue, but we also have to understand the social and historical and political aspects of these diverse cultural groups to understand whatever the presenting issues are. So what is professional counseling? In the ACA 2020 Vision for the Future of Counseling, they agreed on a unified definition of counseling. Professional counseling is a professional relationship. So we also, here we're back to that term relationship, that empowers diverse individuals, families, and groups to accomplish mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. And I really like this diagram from SAMHSA. When we talk about wellness, I come from this 8 dimensions of wellness. And again, they all intersect with each other. But we will see that one domain of wellness is spiritual, and that's expanding a sense of purpose and meaning in life. And for some people, spiritual could be religious, which I'll talk about later on. Some people use spiritual and religion interchangeably, but there is some differences. But again, when we're talking about wellness and when we're working with our clients, when we're training counselors and helping professionals, we do need to incorporate that spiritual and religious perspective. Now, in the middle of this diagram where the 2 L's are for wellness, that is mental health. So wellness has a way of impacting a person's mental health. So when we talk about mental health, I like how the Center for Disease Control defines mental health, includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act, and it also determines how we handle stress, relate to others, and make healthy choices. So if we go back, any of these aspects of wellness, we all have wellness, we all have mental health, but any aspect of these dimensions of wellness can have an influence on a person's mental health, their ability to how they relate to others, how they relate to themselves. Now, what's interesting, a few years ago, the National Institute of Mental Health estimated that only about 17% of US adults are considered to be in a state of optimal mental health. 17%. So that means 63% of people are struggling with their mental health. And we all have mental health. In fact, NAMI reports that 1 in 5 US adults experience a mental illness. 1 in 6 adolescents aged 12 to 17 suffer a mental illness, and 1 in 3 young adults aged 18 to 25. And then NAMI reports that 16% of Black adults experience any mental illness within a 12-month time period. So what we have to understand is that a person's wellness and mental health, we can look at it across the lifespan with children, adolescents, and adults. So why is this important? Because from an ethical perspective, we have a responsibility. We have to do nothing that will harm the client or society. So we already know about maintaining confidentiality, recognizing your limitations, seeking consultation, treat the clients as you would like to be treated, be aware of individual and cultural differences, and so on. But we also have to avoid harm and imposing our values. We also have to avoid actions that cause harm. And then we also have an ethical duty of non-discrimination. Counselors do not condone or engage in discrimination against prospective or current clients, students, employees, supervisees, or research participants based on age, culture, disability, ethnicity, race, religion, spirituality, gender, all of those intersectionalities. So we have an ethical duty to understand how these aspects of culture can impact wellness and impact a person's mental health. So when we talk about allyship, I really like how Dr. Annalise Singh defines a racial ally, an individual who works as an advocate for Black, Indigenous people of color facing racism. The act of speaking up for oneself or others when facing individual or structural racism. So she says being a racial ally means staying humble, apologizing when you get it wrong, and not over apologizing to the point that the person feels they need to take care of you. I'm a believer mistakes don't have to be fatal, it's how you recover. Being a good listener. The Anti-Oppression Network defines allyship as an active, consistent, and arduous practice of unlearning and reevaluating in which a person holding systemic power seeks to end oppression and solidarity with a group of people who are systematically disempowered. And since everyone holds systemic power in some areas and lacks it in others, everyone has areas in which they can practice allyship. And let me share this video clip.
So this concept of allyship is incredibly important when it feels like we have this rapid response culture where we're constantly reacting to things. And the idea of allyship is that if I see something happening, that I speak up, that I speak out, that I'm curious and I take responsibility for getting to know my neighbor. You know, it's not enough that we just exist in diversity around us and that, you know, we have friends that are different, but we actually need to get to know our shared values, respect our differences. And I think to me, this idea of allyship is that I stand up for you for the things that are important to you, and you do the same if I'm being challenged as an American.
And also, everyone has the ability to be an ally, as privilege is intersectional. White women can be actionable allies to people of color, men can be allies to women, cis people can be allies to members of the LGBTQI plus community. Able-bodied people can be allies to those with different abilities, and so on. So when we talk about religious allyship, it is necessary to combat the surge of hate crimes facing minority groups and pave the way for an increasingly diverse America. So here it is, we're talking about minority groups, racial and ethnic people, and religious people. That's that intersectionality. The FBI reported that there was a 6% of increase in bias, motivation, and hate crimes in 2020. And of those hate crimes, 13.3% were religious hate crimes. And so when we talk about religious allyship, again, is necessary to combat the surge of hate crimes facing minority groups. And I'm a believer 60 to 80% of our communication is nonverbal. And when we're working with students and clients, even our nonverbals could communicate prejudice, discrimination. So we also have a duty to be aware of what we're communicating non-verbally as well. So this, I have to be honest, putting this slide together was a little bit challenging because or I shouldn't say challenging, it was very emotionally. The FBI reports that nearly 60% of religious bias hate crimes in the US, this is from 2019, one that hits close to home for me during my AMCD presidential tenure in 2018, the mass shooting at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There were 2 consecutive mass shootings that occurred at mosque and a terrorist attack in Christchurch during a Friday prayer in 2019. The attack carried out by a single gunman who entered 2 mosques at 1:40 p.m. and continued to another mosque. He killed 51 people and injured 40. And then when we talk about attacks against the African-American church in the United States, they have taken the form of arson, bombings, mass murder, hate crimes, and white supremacists propel domestic terrorism. The timeline documents acts of violence against churches with predominantly Black leadership and congregation, with the first one that I found on record was 1822 at Emmanuel AME in Charleston, South Carolina. And you can see that we have had racial attacks and religious hate crimes in the Black church in the 19th century and the 20th century. We know in 1963, 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, killed 4 little girls. The 1974 Ebenezer Baptist Church, the shooting killed Martin Luther King's mother. And I'm just putting them up to show that there is some kind of religious hate crime against Black churches throughout time. And most recently, we had the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, where there was a shooting of a number of people. There was the church, the Flood Christian Church in Ferguson, Missouri, was burned by arsonists during a series of protests over the police shooting of Michael Brown. And then, like I said, for the Mother Emanuel, we had 10 African Americans who were shot in this massive attack. And then in 2019, we had 2 churches in Louisiana where there was an arson attack. So according to the American Academy of Religion, religious illiteracy in the US is a widespread phenomenon that fuels prejudice and antagonism. And if we are going to be working with our clients and our students, we have to be religious and spiritually literate. However, religious illiteracy can be diminished by teaching. That's why I like presenting on this topic, but also teaching using a non-devotional religious perspective, academic perspective. So in 2009, my pastor and I, Dr. William H. Curtis, we wrote an article on the role of the African American church. The church is designed to help the family for defining the meaning and mission of the African American existence. The African American church helped to educate and empower African Americans to live amidst adversity, changing family patterns, and integration into an evolving culture. To assist with progressing in the culture mentally and healthily. One of the things I think it's important is that during the civil rights movement, it was only natural to recruit and mobilize in the church because of sheer numbers, but also because of the trust persons had in the programmatic thrust coming from their church. The success of the civil rights movement at large is credited to the church's power displayed in amassing crowds of persons around issues of morality and justice. This spilled over into the trust that congregants had in the church, would help them progress in the culture mentally. Some would suggest that one of the reasons that the African American church found itself doing pastoral counseling was because of the suspicion many African Americans carried for counseling centers run by those viewed to be oppressors. The distrust placed fear in many as to whether they would really be helped by either secular counseling centers or centers run and operated by those who represented the dominant culture. So there is a mistrust, and In the Black church, when people need help, the first place that they go is the church. And if they need physical help, there are health and wellness ministries. If they need financial help, the benevolence. And now churches are beginning to collaborate and develop not only pastoral counseling, but counseling centers connected to the church or in partnership with the church. And I'll talk a little bit about that more. So why is this important? Spirituality and religion stand out as defining characteristics among many individuals in the United States. 83% feel that their spiritual faith and religious belief are closely tied to their state of mental and emotional health, mind, body, and spirit. 73% state that it's important to see a professional counselor who integrates their values and beliefs in the counseling process. And 69% believe it's important to see a professional counselor who represents spiritual values and beliefs if they had a serious problem. So if you remember, I also gave you statistics about adolescents and young adults, 1 in 3 and 1 in 6. There was a study that came out by Barna last year, in 2019, that said faith communities may be facilitators of connection for troubled 18 to 35 years old. So if the faith communities can be facilitators, and if we talk about pastors and faith leaders, they have training, theological, biblical foundations. So they're not trained to provide the counseling. And they may have training in counseling, but their number one role is that of a theological and biblical perspective. So if we know faith communities can be a facilitator, then we need to be able to partner with churches, especially for this population of 18 to 35-year-olds. Additional rationale is that 77% said it would be important for an elderly parent or relative who needs treatment to get assistance from a mental health professional who knew and understood their spiritual beliefs and values. 77% to 83% of patients over 55 wish to have their religious beliefs integrated into therapy. 79% of African Americans say religion is very important in their lives, and between 57 and 61% of Americans have reported religion is very important in their lives, 85% of African Americans and 50% of Hispanics. And last year, the Gallup poll reported that the United States is a religious and spiritual nation. Gallup indicates that 55 to 59% of Americans say that religion is very important. 2/3 of Americans prefer psychotherapists with spiritual values and one who integrates these values into psychotherapy. Psychologists report discussing spirituality and religion only with 30% of the clients. So if we have a high percentage of clients who want to talk about it, but only 30% of psychologists and clinicians talk about it, we gotta bridge the gap, and we have to provide more training to be able to integrate that. But it's not because Tanya Tinsley says so. Go back to our definition of professional counseling and go back to what we talk about in terms of multicultural counseling. Also, there is an increased awareness and respect for the role of religion and spirituality in the lives of clients and in the role of the helping professional. So Cervic and KCREP have found that professional counselors believe that spiritual, ethical, and religious values are essential to the overall development. Training programs, and this is what's interesting, and I really put this old statistic in because 77% of therapists live by their religious belief. Only 29% incorporated them in treatment. That was from 1991. The statistic I just gave, about 30% of psychologists only incorporated. So when we talk about, and it'll be on my next slide, but the National Association of Social Workers, APA, American Counseling Association, we are all talking about how it is important to weave into the training programs, spiritual and religious aspects as part of the training and the curriculum. And then now you will see, as part of a CERVIC, Association for Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values and Counseling, they have a conference. There is a track that we have at the ACA conference. There's different seminars, workshops, different books that are coming out, and I'll give an example of a book in just another slide. And then finally, as I mentioned, National Association of Social Workers, APA, and Acervic, they provide a rationale for the counseling process. Now I want to take a pause and I want to get you all to think about where you are. So I created a questionnaire, spiritual and religious issues and counseling awareness, knowledge and skills questionnaire. I see I forgot to put the year, 2016. But as part of this, what I am trying to do is take the competencies and take the multicultural competencies and start getting people to think about students, counselors, counselor educators, about where they are on these topics. So I'll just give you a couple questions and get you to think about them. So the instructions say, please read each statement question carefully. From the available choices, circle the one that best fits your answer to each statement. For the open-ended short answer questions, please provide a brief statement. If you want a copy of this 2014, if you want a copy of this instrument or this survey questionnaire, I can definitely send you. But I want you to think about, first one, I can describe the similarities and differences between spirituality and religion, including the basic beliefs of various spiritual systems, major world religions, agnosticism, and atheism. So just, you don't have to say it out loud if you want, but just think about, and this again comes from the Acervic competencies. Next question, I can recognize that the client's beliefs or absence of beliefs about spirituality and or religion are central to his or her or they worldview and can influence the psychosocial functioning. Number three, I actively explore my own attitudes, beliefs, and values about spirituality and or religion. Next one, I continuously evaluate the influence of my own spiritual and or religious beliefs and values on the client and the counseling process. Any thoughts or comments as you think about these questions and reflect on for yourself? You can put it in the chat or say it out loud.
For the very first one, my first inclination was to reach for strongly agree, but I was like, I really can't thoroughly express some of the main points behind some of the other main religions. Like Christianity, because I consider myself a Christian, but in Judaism and Islam and kind of know Taoism and Buddhism like a little bit, but when you start getting outside of that, I'm not certain, I can't say it with confidence. It just keeps decreasing. And so that made me kind of question this a little bit for myself.
Okay, I appreciate, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can check in too. I think like number 3, actively exploring my own attitudes. I think reading that kind of made me check myself a little bit with the idea that maybe, or really just seeing how I think sometimes we can get caught up in the people that we're working with, that we don't really have enough time to see how a lot of that stuff might be impacting us, or how even the things that our clients say may start to impact or influence a lot of our own beliefs. I think, and I know a few of us get together often and just talk about how, you just get so caught up in the work that you maybe don't find enough time to check in and see, like, just like when things happen with George Floyd being murdered, and trying to figure out, like, taking some time to see how that like rattled a lot of my values and people, or like my beliefs in my own spirituality and things.
Yeah, thank you. And Felix, you're absolutely right. And, not only the George Floyd shooting, but the timing of it during this pandemic, and many people that I've worked with in faith-based organizations who had a belief in a higher power was questioning why. So now they have this existential question: why is this happening? Why? It was causing stress and anxiety. So again, them coming to the counseling, we're dealing with the stress and anxiety, but we also have to understand the cultural context of where they're coming from in their religion, their spirituality, their denomination. Yep. Anybody else?
I would like to respond, Dr. Tinsley, and I'm going with number 3 as well: actively explore my own attitude, beliefs, and values about spirituality and or religion. And then also noticing that there's no in between with disagree and agree. And that stuck out to me because I felt stuck in that moment with how I identify as being spiritual, and with religion, it was hard for me finding my bridge, right, and connecting there, and also understanding clients' identities and their religious and spiritual differences with me as a clinician in the therapeutic space, and coming from my worldview of being hurt in the church. I've growing up in a Southern Baptist church with my mom, and coming out as queer and gender queer as well, and how that was not validated in the space for me, and also hit me in my worldview. And so I'm working as a clinician now, kind of repairing and also re-examining my worldview a bit, and knowing like there are church communities out there that are accepting and validating. I try to be mindful of not pushing my own biases and my own stuff onto the client when they're talking about what they use for self-care and what they do, and how they connect with the churches. So I really appreciate this questionnaire because it's challenging me and also helping me grow as well, with also knowing how to separate my own stuff, because it's about the client right now. So I thank you so much for bringing this questionnaire, because it is really helpful.
You are welcome. And there's more questions. And Felix and Wesley and Damaris, I really appreciate you sharing. And one of the things I think it's important, we're only doing this for an hour tonight. I have developed, and there are 15-week courses on this topic. We had a certificate at California University of Pennsylvania. I'm hoping to start a certificate at Lincoln University, because just like we talk about, you know, CCREP requires a social and cultural diversity, a 3-credit course. That's not enough, because we know that becoming a multicultural and social justice competent counselor is a lifelong process. And so is it is the same for being a religious ally. It's a lifelong process. So I just wanted to kind of put that in. So let me move forward.
Could I ask something? I'm sorry, Doc. Could I ask something else about that question?
Yes.
So that you said there's more questions to it. How long is that questionnaire?
I think I had, so what I did is I framed it around the survey competencies. So there's questions on self-awareness, worldview knowledge, assessment, lifespan development, to get you to start thinking about the different dimensions in the survey competencies. I'd have to go and look. I think I may have 15 Likert scale questions and then open-ended questions.
So I'm like, I know you've done tons of work. I mean, I have pestered you about asking questions about some of your work in the past, but like, so I'm thinking like this questionnaire, you've had this for a while and you've given it, like, you have some good data on it. So I'm really curious about Christians' responses on this compared to other groups. And I don't know if there's demographic information on this, and they get it even indicate like what denomination or like how they define their Christianity, because there's a few thoughts that come up. One is there's a lot of hubris within like Western Christianity, right? It's not always, it's resembling what the life and lessons of Jesus was, right?
Right.
And so, it's tied in with all these other things that we already know. So like, I'm like thinking of people in my head taking this. They're like, oh yeah, of course I know this, that. And I'm like, no, you don't, and then, so I'm like, well, let me just stop there. I'm really curious about that. Do you have any data on that?
So let me just say, I have anecdotal data. This is one area that I need to write up, and that's my plan this summer is I'm writing. But what I will say is, because I teach courses, I have taught courses for counselors, for pastoral counselors, for faith leaders, and the questionnaire is designed to tap into the affective, the cognitive, and behavioral aspects of that individual. What we do next, because I'm trying to increase awareness, but I'm also trying to increase worldview knowledge. So one of the assignments that I have in my class is writing a spiritual autobiography, so that a person can now start, like what you three already, when you shared, you were already starting to talk about your autobiography and what impacts your beliefs and how you make meaning. But then I have the students share that with each other to recognize, if I have 15 students, everybody has a different journey. And even though everyone has a different journey, how do we not separate by the differences, but understand and meet that person where they are? So I have had students who are atheists, and we've had this discussion in class. I have had people who are very conservative religious perspectives, and also those that are very liberal. But it makes for a great conversation to really talk about, even though there are the differences, how do we become allies? How do we become multiculturally competent counselors when working with those clients? And I'm a believer that when it comes, and again, remember, the religion, the faith, the spirituality may not be the presenting issue, but we have to understand that person and where they are in order to understand the presenting issues. So I will have people come to me because we're working on depression, we're working on trauma, church hurt, right? But it's a safe space for them to talk about their faith and where they are, regardless of where they are on that. I'm not there to try to convert them. I'm not trying there. My job is not to teach them theology or biblical scriptures, but to understand where they are.
That is really good. I would love to read a little bit more about some of this aspect of it in the class, because then the other part of it to me, when you're asking about the questions here, reflection of my own attitudes and beliefs, but also the other one where I try to be pretty cognizant of my own influence over that. But also, the hardest group for me right now probably is, like evangelical conservative Christians, like theologically and both politically. I don't really consider myself evangelical, but I do consider myself a Christian at this point. But that has been a hard point for me. And that wasn't what I was really thinking about when I was looking at this at first. So that really brought out a lot. I appreciate this.
I think we might have to have a part B, because you're bringing up some good points. And see, these are the things that we do in the class, is to be able to process this and to really kind of try to make sense. And we may not have the answers, but to have a space to process it. Because here's the thing, if we don't process this as counselors, as supervisors, because our supervisees are going to come in having clients, and we have to be able to have these conversations and supervision as well.
Oh gosh, I don't want to take up too much time. I just thought of another question from a thing with a supervisee on this, and young Black male, conservative Christian theologically, and we had a discussion about this, and I was trying to balance it, but I was really challenging him, and I probably challenged him a little too much.
Yeah.
As well, thinking about this.
Yeah, this is good. I think we're definitely going to have a part B on this. So we'll come back and I'll add some more, and we'll talk about this at the end too. So there's a book in our profession. It's Integrating Spirituality and Religion in the Counseling, a Guide for Competent Practice. This is by Cashwell and Young. And in the book, they define spirituality as the universal human capacity to experience self-transcendence and awareness of sacred immanence, with resulting increases in self and other compassion and love. So it's really increased compassion for others, and and self experience and accept more fully one's own pain and suffering, and the pain and suffering of others results in transformation of that suffering into compassion. So when we talk about self-transcendence, the ability to surpass self-limitations. I like what Maslow said. He said self-transcendence could be considered the neglected younger sibling of self-actualization. And that self-transcendence at its core, about transcending or rising above the self and relating to that which is greater than self. So how does a person make meaning that's greater than themselves? So spirituality is developmental, it's contextual, it's highly personal, okay? It's also universal, ecumenical, and it's internal. So it's affective and it's private. Whereas on the other hand, we have religion, and religion is denominational, external, cognitive, behavioral, ritualistic, and public. It's socially defined, and it provides structure for human spirituality, including narratives, symbols, beliefs, and practices that are embedded in ancestral traditions, cultural traditions, or both. When we talk about spirituality and religion, it's possible to be spiritual and not religious. We have a number of millennials that are saying that they're spiritual, they're not religious. And it's also possible to be religious and not spiritual. I had a client who came to church because that was what she was supposed to do. It was ritualistic, that was what happened, but she did not have connection spiritually when she was there to make meaning. You can have somebody who's both spiritual and religious, and you can have people who are neither. And so part of our assessment is to see where our clients are in terms of their spirituality and their religion. And that's where the competencies come in. We know about the multicultural and social justice competencies, which I'll talk about. Acerbic. Damaris, could you put that link for me in the chat? So I'm going to refer to the acerbic competencies. I'm going to go through them rather fast, but acerbic is a division of the American Counseling Association, and they have developed competencies for addressing spiritual and religious issues in counseling, and they support the multicultural and social justice competencies that are part of ACA. So when we talk about the multicultural and social justice competencies, we know the current competencies from 2015 were based on Sue and Sue back in 1992. In 1992, counselors' awareness of their own assumptions, values, and biases, really their beliefs, attitudes, and knowledge, understanding the worldview of their culturally different client, and developing appropriate interventions and strategies and techniques. In between those competencies in 2015, Dr. Gargi Sadowski, Rosakar Sadowski, she developed a multicultural counseling inventory. She added one more domain, relationship, and that in order to be a multiculturally competent counselor, you also had to be able to develop cross-cultural therapeutic relationships. So when we get to the current multicultural and social justice competencies, we start from the center and work our way out. Counselor awareness, client worldview, counseling relationship, and developing that cross-cultural relationship. And I'll give you an example of that. I have a client who they are transgendered, and we have been working together. It's actually coming up on 3 years in July. And they must have been doing a Google search or something on me. This was last year. And they came to the session and said, I didn't realize how religious and everything that you do in the church. And I said, yeah, so let's talk about that. Tell me what's your concern. They had lots of hurt and oppression and judgment from people in the church about being transgender. And so even though we had a relationship into our sessions into 2 years, they were concerned if whether or not I was going to treat them like how other people out there treat them. So we had to have that conversation, and it brought our therapeutic relationship closer. So I applaud my client for bringing that in, because that really goes to show the privileged counselor and the marginalized client, right? And then the fourth is the counseling and advocacy interventions, which is really important, especially for our clients that are religious and spiritual and have that intersectionality. So self-awareness is encouraged by assessing information and by developing a self-trusting yet critically questioning stance towards how we perceive and evaluate events, occasions, experiences, and objects of attention in our lives. So again, as we talked about the competencies, having the attitudes and beliefs, that's the affective component. Knowledge, that's the cognitive component. The skills, the behavioral component, and the action is the social justice. And so when we talk about allyship, that's where that social justice really comes in. Now, we also have the acerbic competencies, and they are framed around the multicultural competencies. I'm going to just go through these quick, and I'm really just going to talk about the domains, and the link for acerbic is in the website. But the acerbic competencies, the first part is culture and worldview. The professional counselor or helping professional can describe similarities and differences between spirituality and religion, including the basic beliefs of various spiritual systems. So that was that first question on the questionnaire. So the questionnaire is based on these competencies. The professional counselor can recognize that the client's beliefs about spirituality or religion are central to his or her worldview and can influence psychosocial functioning. The next part is counselor self-awareness. So just like the multicultural competencies, when it comes to the spiritual, ethical, and religious values, we have to be aware of who we are as spiritual beings. What are our attitudes, values, and beliefs? How have we been socialized? That's why when I am teaching this class, I weave in the spiritual autobiography so people can write about their experiences and become more aware, and just really focus on number 4, evaluate the influence of his or her own spiritual and religious beliefs and values on the client in the counseling process. And then the professional counselor can identify the limits of his or her understanding of the client's spiritual and or religious perspective, and is acquainted with religious and spiritual resources, including leaders who can be avenues for consultation. So I will tell you, I had a client in Pittsburgh who was searching for somebody who she could work with. She was Buddhist, and there was no one that really had a specialty. But she saw that I had a specialty in spiritual and Christian interventions. She said, I want to work with you because I already know you are knowledgeable of the spirituality. She says, you can weave that in, you won't judge me. And she says, and I'll teach you about some of the aspects of my beliefs so that we can weave that together. So I had a duty as well to become more aware and knowledgeable, and I had to go out and do my own research, but I also had to kind of think about what are my beliefs in terms of who she is as a spiritual being. So the next part, human and spiritual development. The professional counselor can describe and apply various models of spiritual and or religious development and the relationship to human development. So when we talk about, this is an expansion of lifespan development. So James Fowler has a faith development theory. So this is one that I attend to it. So when I'm working with some of my Christian clients, I am trying to assess where they are in their faith development. That although I don't talk to them about where they are, it helps me to develop my treatment plan and the goals for counseling. So there are different models that focus on faith development, spiritual development. Communication. The professional counselor responds to client communications about spirituality and religion with acceptance and sensitivity. So I had a client who reached out to me a couple weeks ago. She is in law school. She wants to work on the stress she's dealing with, but she asked me, can we weave in my spirituality and my Christianity? And I said, absolutely. And I was able to accept what she was wanting to do in the counseling session. The professional counselor uses spiritual and religious concepts that are consistent with the client's spiritual and religious perspectives and are acceptable to the client. The professional counselor can recognize spiritual and religious themes in the client's communication and is able to address these. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes on my assessment or on my intake forms, I'll have clients that will leave that section blank, but then I'm always listening to them. And if they bring something in about their faith, their spirituality, or religion, then I can bring that into the counseling session. Assessment. During the intake and assessment process, the professional counselor strives to understand a client's spiritual and religious perspective by gathering information from the client. One of the assessment models that I use is called the FICA Spiritual Assessment. And so F is focus, I is integrate, C is collaborate, and assessment. So when we're talking about that, I'm asking about their faith, spirituality. Are you interested in integrating this into the process? Is there anyone that we can collaborate? I have 3 clients right now that have signed consent forms, and we're collaborating with their pastors of their church. So the pastor is providing more in-depth theological perspectives to the presenting issue. I'm doing more of the psychological pastoral counseling perspective. We now have to think about if this is part of what we do from the wellness model, from multicultural counseling, how do we weave this into the assessment process? And then diagnosis and treatment. When making a diagnosis, the professional counselor recognizes the client's spiritual and religious perspectives can enhance well-being, contribute to a client's problem, or exacerbate symptoms. Dr. Laverne had an article 2 months ago in Counseling Today on church hurt. And I think if you go back, and she was really talking about how we have to understand how somebody's spiritual and religious perspectives can exacerbate. So we have to be trauma informed when it comes to weaving that into the counseling process. And the professional counselor sets goals with the clients that are consistent with the client's spiritual and religious perspectives. So those are the acerbic competencies, okay? So when we talk about allyship in action, and we're coming to an end, incorporate the acerbic competencies within your clinical work. Use of diverse theoretical orientations. There are many articles that really talk about cognitive behavior with spiritual and religious perspectives, existentialism, working with in the counseling profession, and person-centered as well. Continue being a multicultural and social justice competent, helping professional. Collaborate and consult with local universities, community agencies, professional private practices, churches, clergy, faith-based organizations, and etc. And continue training in spiritual and ethical and religious values in your respective discipline and field. And so for me, I went on to get a certificate in missional theology, and I have a doctorate in ministry so that I weave that in together. But we know from an ethical perspective that we are to practice within the scope of our training. There are some generalist things that you can weave in from the acerbic competencies, but if this is an area you're interested in, I would definitely say continue training. So Allyship in Action in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I worked with my church and Pastor Curtis, and we developed a counseling center that's a part of Mount Eric that's open to not only the church congregants, but to the community. So I'll give you an example of how we work together with the Fine Arts Ministry to market the counseling center.
In the midst of a group, do you ever feel like you're all alone? Do you feel like no one understands? Do you find yourself having a bleak outlook as though nothing will ever get better? And there's nothing you can do to improve your situation? Have you lost your interest or ability to enjoy work, hobbies, pastime, or social activities? Do you find yourself with persistent and excessive anxiety and worry that may be interfering with your work, school, or family responsibilities? Are you feeling fatigued and physically drained where even small tasks are exhausting or take longer? Maybe you're plagued by irrational fears and thoughts that you cannot shake.
If you answered yes to any of these questions, we here at Mount Eric Baptist Church believe that you are not alone. We believe that God wants His people to create an environment of care. The ministry of this church takes each individual member's care and the care that members provide to the city as its top priority. The key to recovery is to start small and ask for help. Even when you feel like you are alone, you are not. Reach out to the counseling ministry for support, for we are a ministry that cares. And so as we developed this counseling center, we partnership with Duquesne University, Carlow, Chatham, and we provided continuing education credits. We provided internship opportunities, practicum opportunities for students, and to receive supervision. So it was a community partnership, and we still have this counseling center up and running. We started in 2009. We modeled our counseling center after the Renaissance Center in Baltimore, Maryland. And this is developed by our Reverend Dr. Carla Debnam. She is a licensed professional counselor. She is also a national certified counselor. Their counseling center is a separate 501(c)(3), but it is in collaboration with the church, and they work with different universities in Baltimore to provide internships. They have master's level counselors that want to work in this environment and get supervision hours for licensure. And the Renaissance Center is designed for individuals, couples, families, and groups. And as their mission says, the Renaissance Center is committed to transforming the minds of God's people. The center operates from 2 locations, Woodlawn, Maryland, and in Baltimore, West Baltimore. And the Renaissance Center's purpose is to transform the mind, body, and soul, and moving the individual forward and becoming whole. That gives you an example. In Akron, Ohio, we have the Minority Behavior Health Group, and this was started by Pastor Jeff Dennis. He's a pastor of Mount Calvary Baptist Church, and to service the growing health needs of his local community, he founded and is the CEO of the Minority Behavior Health Group. It's a nationally accredited state certified mental health agency, and it consists of psychologists, counselors, pastors, case managers, and administrative personnel who are committed to providing culturally appropriate and comprehensive counseling services. And they work closely with the university and the community and have a collaborative support and provide training to those in the community, as well as internship opportunities. They have a job open right now. So if anybody's looking for a job and want to move to Akron, Ohio, they're looking for somebody who wants to provide supervision. And then finally, Pastor Tish Dixon Williams, she just started on February 20th, therapist and residence program. And First Baptist Church of Bridgehampton is bridging the gap between faith and mental health with this new program. They are meeting people where they are by bringing mental health services directly to the church. Beginning Sunday, February 20th, and every Sunday, members will have the opportunity to schedule a virtual 45-minute therapy session with their licensed mental health therapist in residence, and they will be providing group counseling. This is the pastor, and one of the things you will see with all of these allyship in action, the pastors are involved, and the first step is collaborating and building that trust, especially since there is a distrust in the community. And so when we talk about pitfalls to avoid, don't assume you know everyone's religion, be open to learning. Don't wait until a tragedy strikes to reach out and build relationships. Don't let outreach become another item on your to-do list. Don't plan for all the parties, just show up and listen sometimes. One of the assignments that I have is a cross-cultural dialogue where you are being exposed to a new religion that you are unfamiliar with, and just showing up and listening and learning from people. And that's increasing that worldview knowledge. And don't forget to look outside faith communities. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has a faith-based and community initiative, and they have different grant opportunities. Allyship is a continual investment of time in supporting others, holding ourselves accountable when making mistakes, When mistakes are made, apologizing and be prepared to rework the approach toward allyships as needs change. And then when we talk about responding through advocacy, we have to have the skills. And what works against social justice, the oppressive behavior, is actively joining in behavior and no response. So when we talk about allyship in action and working towards social justice, we have to educate ourselves, interrupt the behavior, interrupt and educate, support others' proactive responses, and initiate proactive responses. So as we come to an end, Tracy Robinson Woods said, therapy is a gift in that it can help people move towards wisdom, peace, and sanity following tragedy and crises. Therapists who are able to usher spirituality into the therapy room and critique cultural patterns about religion and gender allow clients to experience the healing benefits of spirituality within therapy. And that is it. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I have, well, Felix had to leave early. He had to teach a class. So he
Okay.
had a question, and I'm going to share it. And it's a great question because now I'm thinking, I think I have a similar question because I work in college counseling. So asking for recommendations on activities that you suggest for college students that want to better understand their own idea of spirituality.
Absolutely. So let me pull that up. I have some different acts. So let me go. All right. So when it comes to cultural and worldview, some suggested activities are writing a spiritual autobiography, keeping a journal, reflect on challenging life questions, which religion and spirituality provide a response. Interview a practicing counselor who integrates spiritual religion into the lives of their clients. And then expose yourself to new religious and spiritual experiences. So that's the cross-cultural dialogue, going to events, and then maybe doing a bibliotherapy. When it comes to awareness, again, I would say the spiritual autobiography. Understand that it's a lifelong process. Reflect upon and answer cognitive questions that focus on past experiences. Engage in the practice of mindfulness. You might like this one, Damaris, is use creativity and arts to express spiritual history, drawing, creating a collage, writing poetry, dance, music, and again, like I said, the spiritual autobiography. I hope that helps.
So much. Yes, you're spot on about creativity, and it's making me think as an expressive arts therapist how I can utilize that. So just for myself when I'm working on my own biases and my own challenges of where I get stuck with my hurt as well, and my own identity. So this is really helpful, and also ways I can I can continue to grow and also be an ally as well.
I wrote a book, and it's 4 quarters, and it's a cultural and development approach to writing your spiritual autobiography. And I wrote it for counselors, students, pastors, but it really helps to guide the development of writing your spiritual autobiography and increasing your self-awareness and finishing any unfinished business. What suggestions might you have for counselors seeking to work with faith-based institutions to repair church hurt? So I would say, 1, expand training on trauma-informed practices in the church. There's different trainings on trauma-informed ministry, and weaving in SAMHSA's that I just talked about, their faith-based initiative and community initiative. I would also say different churches and denominations have conferences. Attend the conferences and just listen and learn and pay attention to what you hear. and then develop partnerships, find out who else is doing work on church hurt and trauma in the church, and networking and collaborating and seeing what programs that they have. There is, I'll tell you her name. She has, and you can find her on Facebook, because she's doing a lot of work, and it's called Rethinking Ministry. Her name is Dr. Lakeisha Womack. So if you type in the Google search Rethinking Church, she's really doing a lot of work in how to rethink church and many different areas, not just mental health and counseling as well.
Hi, Dr.
Else?
Tinsley. I have a quick question. Thank you so much for this presentation. This has been really cool. I'm working through this dissertation on some similar topics. I think I actually messaged you on LinkedIn a while back to get some help recruiting for my dissertation.
Oh yeah, tell me
do you
your
know
first
Brittany
name?
Collins? My name's Adam.
Yes, I do remember Adam. Yes.
Yeah. Well, my question is, so and this comes from my own background and some of the participants that I worked with in my study, is a lot of them came from pretty conservative, evangelically churches and denominations, and grew quite a bit through their multicultural development and developed that multicultural competency and became affirming, practicing counselors. And I'm wrestling with this tension of, like, when it comes to gatekeeping for the profession, we don't want to admit students who would do further harm, especially toward the LGBTQ community. And we want students to grow in their multicultural development and faith development in their program and see that potential. What strategies have you used or have you thought about in how you employ gatekeeping strategies, and at the same time try to get a gauge for, like, what potential growth a student might have, if that makes sense?
Oh, absolutely. And you are absolutely right. We are gatekeepers. And I think gatekeeping starts when we are recruiting. So I think about gatekeeping recruitment, retention, and graduation, and then lifelong process. So recruitment, as part of the recruitment process, I think for all students in this field, we have to have interviews. We have to have the personal statements. As part of the personal statements, asking questions about multiculturalism and differences, and then having those questions as part of the interview process. I know when I was at Waynesburg University, we had students come in and do group work together so we can observe them and see how they're interacting in terms of diversity. So we would use that as a guide to kind of start having a baseline. I think it's really important that all faculty, when we have our faculty meeting now, this is now where we're going into retention. If we have any students' concerns, if we're starting to see anything, then we may need to talk about a remediation plan. We have that in our codes of ethics, a remediation plan. And so working with students to help them with becoming more aware and knowledgeable. I think the challenge we have now is once people graduate. I would really love to see, as gatekeepers, as part of our licensure renewal process, that in addition to the ethics requirement, we have a cultural diversity requirement that's people still have to continue. But I also think, especially in doctoral programs and with faculty, we have to do a better job with supervision and really incorporating it into supervision, not just for master's level students, but also for those who are seeking licensure.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yes. Anything else? I hope this was helpful. Thank you for having me.
This was good, Doc. Thank you a lot. Appreciate it. Always good to see you.
Yes, and we'll have to talk some more, and I'll make sure to get the full survey questionnaire to you as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Hey, BJ, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tinsley. This was amazing, and I am so grateful for your presence and your work and sharing this with, the NC State community and also us counselors. And please let me know if you want to do a part 2, because
Okay.
this is so. I want to give this presentation the space it deserves, because it's so complex and there's so many layers into religion and spirituality, and then incorporating that into counseling. And also what Wes was talking about too, some of the challenges that come up in supervision and us training, as at least in my perspective, will eventually maybe next year will be training as a supervisor. So this is really helpful information and really making me think about the different roles as a professional, coming into counselor educator, transferring into supervision, and then as a clinical perspective, and then also just me as a human. I appreciate the different parts of it, and most importantly, advocating for the Black community as well. Because I have to admit, when I started becoming an ally and working on my own biases, and I'm speaking as a person of color who is not Black, I had to work on, well, how can I tie in religion and tie in the church? Because I did work with a lot of clients who did utilize the church as a healing method and a way to cope, and really where they went to for help. So it was really affirming to hear that, and also challenging me more to look into those resources to further support my clients, and potentially further support my supervisees and students as well. So this was phenomenal, and I loved every bit of it. So
thank you very much.
To more connections with you in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We definitely will stay in touch. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks, Doc. See you. Have a good one.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
See y'all.